Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to join the study of Torah, which is conducted through reading words out of a book and also through sharing one another's thoughts and ideas and presences with one another. All of that is Torah. I'm very grateful that we come together this way because through our coming together in Torah, I grow in Torah, and I hope the same is true for you as well. We are in Parshat Yitro, which begins in the book of Exodus with verse 1 of chapter 18. If you'd like to turn to that, we'll get ready to say our blessings together. And I do invite all of us at this point to go ahead and unmute, and then together we can recite our blessing, celebrating this wonderful opportunity of being in Torah with one another and sharing one another that way. So let's go ahead and unmute and say our blessing together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu mitzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for this opportunity of immersing in words and deeds and relationships of Torah and sharing them with one another and thereby growing together. Again, we are at chapter 18 of the book of Exodus, verse 1. I'll go ahead and while everyone is muted, I'll share a few verses and then I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read some verses as well. Chapter 18, verse 1. Jethro, priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, how Adonai had brought Israel out from Egypt. So Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after she had been sent home, and her 2 sons, of whom one was named Gershom, that is to say, I have been a stranger in a foreign land. And the other was named Eliezer, meaning, the God of my father was my help, and God delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought Moses' sons and wife to him in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. God sent word to Moses, Yitro sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law, Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law. He bowed low and kissed him. Each asked after the other's welfare, and they went into the tent. Steve, would you like to read a little bit there, beginning at verse 8?
Sure, thank you. Moses then recounted to his father-in-law everything that the Eternal had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardships that had befallen them on the way, and how the Eternal had delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced over all the kindness that the Eternal had shown Israel when delivering them from the Egyptians. Blessed be the Eternal, Jethro said, who delivered you from the Egyptians and from Pharaoh, and who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Eternal is greater than all gods, yes, by the result of their very schemes against the people. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices for God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to partake of the meal before God with Moses' father-in-law.
Thank you, Steve. Let me invite Dave, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 13?
Next day, Moses sat as magistrate among the people, while the people stood about Moses from morning until evening. But when Moses' father-in-law saw how much he had to do for the people, he said, What is this thing that you are doing to the people? Why do you act alone while all the people stand about you from morning until evening? Moses replied to his father-in-law, It is because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, it comes before me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make known the laws and teachings of God.
Thank you, Dave.
Mo-
Let me invite Margot, if she'd like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 17.
But Moses' father-in-law said to him, "The thing you are doing is not right. You will surely wear yourself out, and these people as well, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. Now listen to me. I will give you counsel, and God be with you. You represent the people before God. You bring disputes before God and enjoin upon them the laws and the teachings and make known to them the way they are to go, and the practices they are to follow. You shall also seek out from among all the people capable men who fear God, trustworthy men who spurn ill-gotten gain. Set these over them as chiefs of thousands, hundreds, and fifties and tens, and let them judge the people of all at all times. Have them bring every major dispute to you, but let them decide everyday minor disputes themselves. Make it easier for yourself by letting them share your burden with you. If you do this, and God so commands you, you will be able to bear up, and all these people too will go home unwearied."
Thank you, Margot.
Moses heeded his father-in-law.
Margot, let me invite Robin if she'd like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 24.
Yes, thank you. Moses heeded his father-in-law and did just as he had said. Moses chose capable individuals out of all Israel and appointed them heads over the people, chiefs of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. And they judged the people at all times. The difficult matters they would bring to Moses, and all the minor matters they would decide themselves. Then Moses bade his father-in-law farewell, and he went on his way to his own land.
And Gary, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at the very start of chapter 19?
Thank you. On the third, am I unmuted? Okay. On the third new moon, after the Israelites had gone forth from the land of Egypt, on that very day they entered the wilderness of Sinai. Having journeyed from Rephidim, they entered the wilderness of Sinai and encamped in the wilderness. Israel encamped there in front of the mountain, and Moses went up to God. The Eternal One called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus shall you say to the house of Jacob, and declare to the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. Now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. Indeed, all the earth is mine. But you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel."
Thank you, Gary. Let me invite Richard. Would you like to read beginning at verse 7?
Thank you. Moses came and summoned the elders of the people and put before them all the words that the Lord had commanded him. All the people answered as one, saying, "All that the Lord has spoken, we will do." And Moses brought back the people's words to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, "I will come to you in a thick cloud in order that the people may hear when I speak with you, and so trust you thereafter." Then Moses reported to the people's words to the Lord, and the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and warn them to stay pure today and tomorrow. Let them wash their clothes. Let them be ready for the third day, for on the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people on Mount Sinai. You shall set bounds for the people round about, saying, 'Beware of going up to the mountain or touching the border of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall be either stoned or pierced through, beast or man, he shall not live. When the ram's horn sounds a long blast, they shall come up to the mountain.'" Moses came down from the mountain to the people and warned the people to stay pure, and they washed their clothes. And he said to the people, "Be ready for the third day. Do not go near a woman."
Thank you, Richard. Let me invite Jim and Peggy if you'd like to pick up beginning at verse 16.
Okay, thank you. On the third day, as morning dawned, there was thunder and lightning, and a dense cloud upon the mountain, and a very loud blast of the horn. And all the people who were in the camp trembled. Moses led the people out of the camp toward God, and they took their places at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was all in smoke, for Adonai had come down upon it in fire. The smoke rose like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled violently. The blare of the horn grew louder and louder. As Moses spoke, God answered him in thunder. Adonai came down upon Mount Sinai on top of the mountain, and Adonai called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Adonai said to Moses, "Go down, warn the people not to break through to Adonai to gaze, lest many of them perish. The priests also who come near the Adonai must stay pure, lest Adonai break out against them." But Moses said to Adonai, "The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, 'Set bounds upon the mountain and sanctify it.'"
So Adonai said to him, "Go down and come back together with Aaron, but let not the priests or the people break through to come up to Adonai, lest he breaks out against them." And Moses went down to the people and spoke to them. God spoke all these words, saying, "I, Adonai, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods besides me. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image or any likeness of what is in the heavens above, or in the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, Adonai, your God, am an impassioned God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children, upon the third and upon the fourth generations of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the thousandth generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not swear falsely by the name of Adonai, your God, for Adonai will not clear one who swears falsely by his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. The seventh day is a Sabbath of Adonai, your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son or daughter, your male or female slave, or your cattle, or the stranger who is within your settlements. For in 6 days Adonai made heaven and earth and sea, and all that is in them. He rested on the seventh day. Therefore Adonai blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it.
Thank you both so much. Let me invite Bill Shafton. Would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 12?
Certainly, thank you. Honor your father and your mother, that you may long endure on the land that the Eternal your God is assigning to you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor male nor female slave, nor ox, nor ass, nor anything that is your neighbor's.
Thank you, Bill. Let me invite Justin to read a little bit there, beginning at verse 15.
Oh, 15.
Rabbi, I'm sorry, I can't read this
Okay,
evening.
very good. Let me invite Jay. Would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 15?
Yes, Rabbi, thank you. All the people witnessed the thunder and lightning, the blare of the horn and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they fell back and stood at a distance. "You speak to us," they said to Moses, "and we will obey. But let not God speak to us, lest we die." Moses answered the people, "Be not afraid, for God has come only in order to test you, and in order that the fear of him may ever be with you, so that you do not go astray." So the people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. The Lord said to Moses, Thus shall you say to the Israelites, you yourselves saw that I spoke to you from the very heavens. With me, therefore, you shall not make any gods of silver, nor shall you make for yourselves any gods of gold. Make for me an altar of earth and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your sacrifices of well-being, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be mentioned, I will come to you and bless you. And if you make for me an altar of stones, do not build it of hewn stones, for by wielding your tool upon them, you have profaned them. Do not ascend my altar by steps, that your nakedness may not be exposed upon it.
Thank you so much, everyone. That's our Torah portion for the week. And if everyone could remain muted just for a few minutes, I'd like to share with you a little bit of focused study. It's certainly a very, very rich and dramatic moment in our Torah, the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai. So let me just focus a little bit by beginning to look at, and again, if everyone could just be muted so we can minimize the background, and then we'll open it up for everyone to be able to have an opportunity to speak. So on the Torah sheet that I provided to you, the study sheet, I'd like to just look for a moment at the graphic that's at the very top. This is a painting by Yehoshua Weissman. Yehoshua Weissman is a man who grew up actually in Pasadena, and then I believe it was shortly after high school or maybe during college, he made Aliyah, moves to Israel, and while he's there, he embraces the Orthodox community, and the Orthodox community there embraces him. He settles in Efrat. He serves in the Israeli army, and eventually he finds his particular community among the Breslov community, a subset within the Hasidic world. And it wasn't until later in life that he actually begins to paint. And he didn't go to any schools. He just basically self-taught himself. And he was encouraged by his teachers within the Breslov community to go ahead and paint, to express himself, to bring the presence of God out into the world through his artwork. And actually, one of the paintings by Yehoshua Weissman appears in our weekly email that I send out on Tuesdays. It's in that section of the email that talks about how we have recordings of all of our studies, which are available on YouTube through the Shulchan YouTube channel. So there's another painting that you'll see every week by Yehoshua Weissman. This is a painting that he entitled Anochi of Mount Sinai. And of course, Anochi are the first words, Anochi is the first word that God speaks as part of this revelation at Mount Sinai. And in fact, Yehoshua Weissman's own commentary about this emerges out of our sense of midrash that's from the early rabbis. He writes, the rabbis teach that encapsulated in this first word are all the vast entirety of the Torah. So I've entitled this week's study session, The Voice Out of the Darkness. There's this sense of eruption, which is the feeling I get from looking at this painting, almost as if it is a volcano that is somehow erupting with fire and power. And we're going to look at to what extent is this eruption of power, is it a force of destruction, a voice of creation? So we'll look at that a little bit. And in terms of the text, I'd like to begin where our Torah portion itself begins, which is the appearance of Yitro, after whom this week's Torah portion is named. And it starts off, the narrative account starts off with Yitro entering the scene, bringing into the camp Zipporah, the wife of Moses, along with the two sons. And I think it's interesting that this Torah portion opens this way. So of course, on a just purely narrative level, what's happening is we have this family reunion, and the family reunion is accompanied by a meal, and then you'll see that Yitro passes along some words of wisdom as an elder would to his son, in this case, his son-in-law. So that's in the narrative level what's happening. This week, as I was studying the Torah portion, it occurred to me that maybe this narrative storyline of a family reunion is in some ways meant to model for us what could be happening next, which is in a sense a reunion of God and the people of Israel. And some of the things that are perhaps being modeled by the physical reunion of the family of Moses and Yitro and Moses' wife and Moses' children, that some of those elements are perhaps what Torah or perhaps what Yitro is trying to model for what's going to happen next in terms of the encounter between God and the people of Israel, because it's a sense of a reunion. This is a presence that you're familiar with. There is this reunion of male and female, of Moses and Zipporah coming back together. There's also a presence of future generations there in the storyline represented by Moses' two sons. And also what happens in the encounter between Moses and Yitro is that Yitro encourages Moses to transfer some of his sovereignty, if you will, some of his power, and delegate it to others, to empower others to assume governance, sovereignty over the community. And so maybe there's that modeling, if you will, going on in this human story about what should be happening at this reunion of Israel and God, which is this sense of the power should be shared. The power should be spread among the community rather than being just confined to one figure within the community. So this is what kind of occurred to me in terms of reading the story. And in particular about the character of Yitro, there's a lot of midrash that really creates Yitro, portrays Yitro as a real heroic figure. And so here we have in number one commentary by Rashi, who's also picking this up from some midrash Mechilta, which says this: the text sings the praise of Yitro, for he was settled in the honor, kavod, of the world. When his heart moved him to go out into the wilderness, a place of tohu, to hear words of Torah. So the way Midrash and the early rabbis portray Yitro is that he's really a hero of spiritual curiosity. They use a word in Hebrew that conveys the notion that Yitro is a very open-minded person. He's open to new experiences. He's open to new ways of worship, life, and he's stirred by a story. He's stirred by a story, and so stirred that he leaves behind his kavod, his sense of position, of honor in the world. He lets go of his own past assumptions and even his own identity, if you will, in a kind of uncalculating openness. So this is a very heroic figure, open, exposing himself, leaving behind his own sense of being settled, of having a position of authority and honor and place, to go out into the tohu, to go out into the emptiness of it all, because his heart stirred him when he heard these stories. So that sets it up dramatically, if you will, to see, are the Israelites going to measure up to Yitro in terms of this moment of encounter with power and revelation? Will they be as open-hearted as Yitro? Will they be willing to let go of the weight that they've carried with them as Yitro has let go of it and embrace a new path? That's kind of the way this challenge, if you will, is being set up from the very opening of our Torah portion. So let's see how it describes the way the people of Israel react. So I have here in number 2, the words that are used when the moment of revelation happens at Mount Sinai. It says, chapter 20, verse 15, it says, all the people witnessed the thunder and lightning, the blare of the horn and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they fell back and stood at a distance. And the word there that's used for fell back is vayanu'u. They fell back, and that comes from the Hebrew verb nu'ah, which means to quiver, to waver, to tremble. So the commentators pick up on this notion that something is happening that's causing these people to waver, to shake, to quiver. What is this notion? What is this aspect of their wavering, their quivering? And so here we have Rashi commenting on this again from Midrash Methota. He writes, movement in this context means only trembling. And then our Talmud from Masechet Brachot picks up on that and says the Torah was given in dread and fear and trembling and shuddering. So here's this moment. They've just been freed from Egypt by this powerful force that's liberated them, that's parted the sea for them, that's provided food for them, that's provided water for them, and now it speaks to them in order to give them further instructions and guidance. And what do the Israelites do? They shake and shudder, and they experience a sense of, according to the Talmud, dread and fear. So the big question is, what's the reason for their sense of dread, of fear? It is as if they're experiencing some kind of traumatic experience. What is the nature of that trauma? What's the reason for it? So if you have a study sheet, we'll turn it over and we'll look at number 3, which is the narrative from the book of Deuteronomy, which is now reiterating this experience at Sinai. So here's Moses describing for them this moment at Sinai. Moses says, when you heard the voice out of the darkness, while the mountain was burning in fire, you came close to me and said, God, our God, has shown us his glory, and we have heard his voice out of the fire. We have seen this day that though God speaks with a human being, that person may live. Now, why should we die if this great fire consumes us? If we hear the voice of God, our God, any longer, we shall die. For who that is all flesh has heard the voice of the living God speak out of the fire as we have and live? So there are a few things that are highlighted in this Deuteronomy version of the narrative of this moment at Sinai. First of all, it emphasizes, because it mentions that at least 3 times here, the voice. There's something about the voice that seems to have generated this kind of traumatic response that the Midrash picks up on. And where does this voice come from? The voice comes out of the darkness. Darkness comes out of something that is darkness, representing something that is unknown, something that one is exposed to, a dimension that one is not sure what's happening there. Perhaps there's a realm where the unfamiliar lies. And then also it's a voice that comes out of fire. And fire, as we know, is an element that has the power to be both creative as a former welder, someone who worked with blacksmiths. I know the power of fire to be creative, to give shape and form to things. Out of fire, and we're going to see that soon, out of fire, things are born. Out of fire, things are made out of fire. But we also know that fire has a terrible destructive capacity as well. So here we are, the people are exposed to this enormous power that could either create or destroy. In that sense, it's dangerous and not quite sure, perhaps, what it's going to do to them or what they can do with it. We also know that fire was an experience that Moses had. Moses also experienced personally this voice that came out of a fire. And surely he must have passed this story along to them. I'm sure along the way, someone must have said to him, Moses, when did you first encounter God? And surely he must have said, oh, I'm so glad you asked me that. It was while I was a shepherd and I was looking for one of my lost flock. And there was this bush and it was amazing. It was on fire, but it wasn't shrinking at all. And I just stared at it for a while. And then I heard the voice of God. So Moses experienced and no doubt shared with them this notion that it's possible for there to be a burning that does not consume that which is on fire. So they have this knowledge. They have this knowledge in the form of the story that fire doesn't necessarily have to destroy and consume that which is on fire. Okay. So here we have Moses trying to reassure people. And number 4. The other point I want to make is it also says the voice of the living God. The voice of the living God. So the voice of the living God seems to also be a source of trauma for the people of Israel. Seems to cause them to shake and shudder and have a sense of dread and have a sense of fear. Curious, because it's almost as if it's life and not death that the Israelites are afraid of. It's almost as if what's causing them to be afraid is the possibility of success, the possibility of power, the possibility of having responsibility. Maybe that sense of the power of life that is theirs to receive is perhaps what's causing them to shake and tremble. So in number 4, Moses says to the people, don't fear, don't be afraid, for God has come only in order to test you. Now the word that's used here for test, nasot, is a word that we might remember because it's the same word that's used with Abraham. It says God sought to test Abraham, and it uses the same verb here nasa, to test. And so what was Abraham's test? It was to go up and to Mount Moriah, and there to face his son, Isaac. And the midrash about what happens in that moment is that Abraham is looking down at Isaac with a knife in his hand. And then the text says, wait, stop, don't lay a hand on the boy. And commentary says, why does it say, don't lay a hand on the boy instead of don't stab the boy with that knife that's in your hand? And the commentary says, because at the moment that this voice from heaven spoke out, Moses had already dropped the knife. Because when he looked down in the face of his son, he had this flood of realization that this was not the way. He had this flood of compassion. He saw perhaps God in the face of the one that was beneath him and dropped the knife. And that's when the voice said, don't even lay your hand on the boy. So there's a way in which at that very moment, Abraham realizes the power of compassion is the way of Torah. And so he enters into a new stage of his life. He evolves to a higher state, if you will, of a heightened sense of compassion. And yet we also know from a lot of the story itself that we read in the Torah and from the commentary, this is a traumatic moment as well. There's a great source of confusion that seems to happen towards the end of the story because the storyline itself doesn't seem to account for Isaac's presence there at the end of the story. It's almost as if Abraham is telling this story to someone who eventually writes it down and is saying, I really don't even know what happened to Isaac at the end. I was looking around and I wasn't even aware of him. I don't know where he went or what happened. That part of the event is kind of foggy to me. This is a way in which maybe it's expressing the sense of the confusion and the trauma that was happening, not because of something bad, but because of something transformative that was happening. The power of this moment. So perhaps it might be that Moses is trying to explain to people, you have nothing to fear. This is a moment of evolution and transformation, growth and development for you, just like it was in the testing of our ancestor Abraham. And Rashi is going to pick up on that notion about what this testing is all about in his commentary. He writes, in order to exalt you, to elevate you throughout the world, Nasot is an expression of elevation and greatness. And that sense of elevation and greatness, this moment of human evolution, of human growth and development, is going to be, I think, amplified a little bit more in our next commentary, which is out of Ha'emek Devar, which is a work by the Nazi, Natalis Yehuda Berlin, who was one of the great Lithuanian rabbis in the mid-late 19th century. Ha'emek Devar means to delve into the matter. And about all this, as it's kind of interpreted for us by the great contemporary commentator Aviva Zornberg, writes this about how Ha'emek Devar explains this. It is human spiritual greatness that is God's purpose in revealing God's self. The ability to endure hardship through the intense amplification of inner resources. In other words, the Nazi is telling us that this moment of Mount Sinai is not designed to tell the people of Israel, I am God, I am the totality of power, and therefore you should worship me. The Nazi seems to be saying the purpose of this revelation is to elevate human beings, to help emerge out of human beings their power, their greatness, so that they can assume greater responsibility and live in the world in that way. Our concluding commentary is from the great 20th century Jewish philosopher Manuel Levinas, from an article called Revelation. He writes, "The Talmud affirms the prophetic and verbal origin of the revelation, but lays more emphasis on the voice of the person listening. A human being is not a mere receiver of sublime messages. A human being is at the same time the person to whom the word is said and the one through whom there is a revelation. A human being is the site of transcendence." When we started studying together Sefer Shemot, the book of Exodus, we talked about how it's characterized, especially in Kabbalah, as the exile of the word, and that the story of Exodus is about the journey of regaining speech, regaining the capacity to use word in a generative, creative, power-affirming way, rather than speech being used only to suppress and oppress and enslave and assert power over others. And from the very opening verses in Exodus, we see the people trying to learn how to speak. We see Moses grappling with speech, to use speech as a form of liberation. And if you will, this moment of Mount Sinai is the voice seeking to help people find their own voice, to learn how to speak. And that's what Levinas seems to be saying here. It's not just about receiving, it's also about becoming amplified with your own voice, to use your own voice as a source of your growth, your development, and growing into greater sense of responsibility. So this sense of darkness that the Deuteronomy narrative refers to, I think is referring to a darkness that's not just outside of us, it's a darkness inside of us. And so this voice emerges out of that darkness. It emerges from a depth that we're perhaps unfamiliar with. Perhaps it's a dimension of ourselves that we didn't even know existed. And then the voice comes with a sense of fire. And it's a fire, again, that's not just outside of ourselves. It's a fire inside of ourselves. It's a fire of justice, of righteousness, of power, of generativity, of and it is a fire that could be used very destructively, or fire that could be used very positively. We have to choose how to use that power that's within us. And so this moment of Sinai, I think, is trying to expose to people their sense of responsibility and of our power in this world. And perhaps, like for the Israelites, when we realize the power that we have within us to assume greater responsibility, not just be passive recipients of what happens around us, but to be active agents in our own evolution and in the evolution of the world. Maybe that's what causes us to tremble a little bit. Maybe we don't want that. Maybe we just assume someone else, like Moses, you do that. You hear what's being said to us. We don't want to hear it. We designate you to be the hearer and receiver of all this. We just want to go mow the lawn and watch the Super Bowl on Sunday, okay? We don't want to have to assume any greater responsibility for our lives. We're done with it. That might be what this is all about. That sense of shaking and shuddering and a sense of dread that, oh, we have the power to assume responsibility for our lives. We can't just blame it on Pharaoh and say, what can I do? I'm a slave. I do what I'm told. Sinai is saying, no longer. You're free and you're responsible. So with that, I'd love to hear your thoughts and reactions and what other things you saw within this Torah portion. I'll start with Mark. Go ahead.
Can we revisit the word nasot?
Go ahead.
I would like you to, again, repeat what you said earlier about the test of Abraham and what the Hebrew word was. Was it nasa or was it nasot?
Nasa, yeah.
So I'm wondering, for me, it's a grammatical thing. Why would it be nasot in this case where it would have been nasa in the case with Abraham? Plural.
Yeah.
So here's my thought. I just want to share it. Is this test, because it's in the plural, is it perhaps intended to challenge the Israelites that they must test themselves as opposed to being an act in which God is testing Abraham as a singular situation? This is more of a collective. You're testing yourselves here. And I'm just wondering if that maybe is the reason that's plural as opposed to singular, because it doesn't seem to fit as a singular if you're talking to a group of people.
Okay, I like it. So let me see if I can reiterate what you just said, Mark. That what's happening here is you're saying that the Israelites are testing themselves. You mean like I myself or the person next to me?
No, I'm saying that the Israelites are going to be challenged in the future and they're going to be tested. Everything that you were talking about, how we have to take responsibility and not just sit back and relax. You have to test yourselves to meet the challenges of the future. So I'm wondering if God is imbuing God into the people at this point by making nasot the test, a plural.
I like it. And it takes me back also to that modeling opening narrative that we saw with Yitro, which is spread the responsibility around, okay? You have to assume greater responsibility. And when you're hearing cases, right, you're constantly, I guess, in the sense of, that's a trial. Those are trials and tests as well. So it's kind of an interesting tie-in as well. Thank you for that. You want to say some more about it?
No, I'm done.
Okay. All right. Margot, thank you.
It seems to me that the most important thing is the story it takes more importance than what to me is the most important thing in this parsha, and that is the very first time that the 10 Commandments are uttered. And these 10 Commandments, as we know, have endured for thousands of years. And this is what we witnessed in this is the first time they're told.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Margot. And let me go ahead, Gary. Thank you. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Gary.
Okay. Were you going to comment, Rabbi, before I raise my hand?
I was just going to invite, if anyone else wants to say something about the 10 Commandments, I just want to leave that on the table for a little bit, but I want you to go ahead and then we'll come back to it.
Thank you. So I wanted to make a comment and then ask you or ask the group a question. So early on, it looks like it's, I guess, 25. Moses chose capable deputies out of all of Israel and appointed them heads over the people. No, I'm sorry. That's not the one. Oh, gosh. Well, I wrote it down. He said, Moses chose capable deputies out of Israel and they judged the people at all times. So the reason this caught my eye is that I was very, very recently having a chat with a friend of mine who happens to be Jewish. And we were talking about a current event, and I gave my opinion. And he said to me, who are you to judge? And had I read this, I would have said, well, obviously I'm not a capable deputy, but I have a brain and I'm giving you my opinion, which I think is absolutely appropriate. My question, so that's appropriate. If you and I are chatting, I think it's appropriate for me to give an opinion, even if it's judgmental. But what if I come across someone, for instance, who is, in fact, Margot, you were just mentioning the 10 Commandments. So one of them is honor your mother and father. What if I came across someone who's not? Perhaps he's gone astray and he hasn't talked to his parents for quite some time. I believe I have an obligation to judge him, and not personally, but perhaps say in our tradition, we're taught that you have to honor your mother and father, not love them, you have to honor them. And I believe I, Gary, have an obligation to tell that to someone. My question is, what does Judaism say? Because that's a pretty sketchy area to start judging someone else.
I would say that Judaism has a lot to say about what it means to serve as a judge. But let me, Richard, you have some thoughts there?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, it ties all three of them in my mind together, that the commandment to honor your parents so that you will long endure. Now, he's telling the tribe, his chosen people, you must have this as a guideline. This is your guideline to honor one another and to honor, so you'll long endure. And duration is different than time. And when you said in one of the comments that the people say, well, how can anybody that's all flesh see God and not die? We're going to die. Well, to me, the answer is we're not all flesh. God is immanent. He's in each of us. And when we listen, it takes our attention away from ego and fighting and judgmentalism and brings a path for these commandments of honor and respecting other people to the fore. So these deputies are getting some experience in what it's like. And maybe they'll learn to be judgmental and nasty and be like slaveholders, or they'll learn a way of communicating with people who are disrespectful to show them respect in some way so they don't further entrench in opposition to them. So I think it ties together in how we treat one another. And yes, if somebody is not, and you say, well, in my tradition, well, right away, you have made a division between yourself and this other person, and they're going to re-entrench farther and reload with their ammunition of saying, well, you never were with my parents and they're no damn good. And how you handle that is what we're all trying to do in this moment in our country. How do we approach the so-called opposition without judgment to be silent and wait? Smile positively when they say something that's right, and when they say something that's really stupid, be mute, because they want attention. Slowly you can turn them into being respectful to you. And that's what I think this chapter is telling us. You have some experience trying to judge, and you have to open yourself and listen and be non-judgmental. And it says in there, and you said it, to allow this energy to float through you, because your inner resource is the immanence of God in there if you pay attention to it.
So I'm going to get back to the issue about judging as well in just a second. Thank you, Richard, for about your mother and your father and that aspect of it. And let me ask Anna, did you have something you want to share?
Yeah, in terms of judging, there's a part in Torah where it says, don't put a stumbling block in front of the blind. And wherever that is, right in that section, it also says something like, when you see your brother go astray, contend with your brother, contend with him there, lest he sinned further or something. Now, I don't know what the word contend is there in Hebrew, but when you see something that isn't right, or you want to judge someone else, in that part of the Torah, it says, go humbly to this person, go humbly, and just speak with them about what you have to say. It doesn't say pass judgment on him, because that would almost be like gossiping, it wouldn't be good, but to just contend with your brother, not judge your brother. Judge is an awful lot of New Testament in my ears,
Yeah, thank you, Anna. And Gary, even in the portion that we read, which is verse 21 of chapter 18, you shall seek out from among all the people capable ones who fear God, trustworthy ones who spurn ill-gotten gain. So we know that we're going to encounter, in addition to that, we're going to encounter words that say something like, and when you are judging, don't necessarily give deference to someone just because they're rich. Don't necessarily side with someone because they're poor. We can't take bribes. So that we know that it's not just, not everyone of any character is capable of serving in this role. When we get deeper into the literature, we're going to see ideally, it should be someone who has the capacity to have a sense of what that person's life is like that you're judging. Because then you're putting yourself into the calculation, into the framework as well. You're not standing as someone who's uninvolved in the situation. You are giving some deep self-reflection as you are also discussing someone else. So I think those are key characteristics. Otherwise, it turns judging into being judgmental, which is a negative thing. Thank you very much, Gary, for raising the issue. Let me ask others who have some responses to this week's Torah portion. This very dramatic moment at Mount Sinai. Thank you, Dave, for giving us the graphic that places us all there. And then maybe if you look closely, you might recognize some of the people in the scene there. So I want to thank everyone for, Dave, did you want to say something? Yeah. And you'll unmute yourself so we could hear your words. Did you want us to share something? No?
No, I'm just pointing to that little guy going to the mountain, that's all. He looks like my uncle.
Okay. So once again, I want to thank everyone for coming together, because it is a scary thing, really, to go into the dark, to experience the darkness, to go into depths of ourselves that are unfamiliar territory, and to experience this eruption of power. And if we just do it by ourselves, it could become very dangerous. We can get carried away with our power when it's unmitigated by the norms and expectations of a community. So to be a part of a community, to engage in this exploration, both of the text outside me and the text inside of me, to do it within community, I think gives it a greater chance of the expression of whatever power I find to be for holy purposes, rather than being an unrestrained assertion and imposition of myself on others. So thank you all very much. I'm so glad for your presence in my life and helping me to grow in Torah. I look forward to our regathering next week. May you all be well. God bless you all. See you next week. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, Rabbi.
Adonai malach el haaretz,
V'yavdagel haaretz yismechu Rabbi. Adonai is the Holy One. Let the earth exult. Let the many islands rejoice. Rejoice. Dense clouds are around Adonai. Righteousness and justice are the base of God's throne. Adonai
Bless you. Bless you. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
A good week to all. Be well.
You too.